Have you ever wished that Mobile Frame Zero was actually steampunk? Or what about if Valkyria Chronicles had Mecha? Are you upset that Iron Harvest isn't getting a sequel? Well, I can't change any of those things, but I do have a game to talk about, one that I think is going to scratch a lot of those itches. The game is called Brassbound, Adamantine Dawn, or BAD for short. Let's talk about it. Before I continue with the video, I think it's important that I provide two disclaimers. First, I'm not being paid to make this video. I have talked to the creator of BAD, somebody who goes by Brodad Brickworks, on Discord, but I am not making this video to promote the project because I was paid to. I'm doing this video because I believe in it. I've been a fan of LEGO and tabletop games for years now, and I'm a firm believer in the potential for LEGO to transform the way that we play tabletop games. Thus, when I saw this project, I knew that I had to make a video about it. This is my opinion. You are free to disagree with it if you like. The second disclaimer is about the state of the game. BAD is still a work in progress. As it stands, I think the game is very playable. I myself have played an earlier version as a playtest. This video does not reflect the final version of the rules, however. I think it is playable, but Brodad Brickworks is going to be adding more to the game, and I think that as time goes on, it's going to get even more feature complete. However, he also needs the help of the community to make that a reality. Hence, I'm making this video to draw more eyeballs on the project in the hopes that other people will contribute as well. As you know, I myself have put out a number of fan games and projects, and I know that community members can really make a difference. So if you think that this project is worth checking out, you should join the Discord or go to the itch.io page, which will be linked in the video description. So, with that out of the way, it's time to talk about BAD. A good point to start with, I think, is the lore of the game. Lore is really foundationally why people care about rolling dice. Adamantine Dawn takes place roughly in the World War I period. The year was 1917, so goes the opening crawl at the start of the rulebook. The basic idea is that World War I went weird. Some kind of scientific experiment backfired, producing a cataclysm that ultimately ruined the world. Years later, the game's picked up as those that survived the cataclysm are trying to rebuild what's left of the world. Now, I know that with the recent launch of Trench Crusade, there has been a lot of renewed interest in the World War I period and its aesthetics. Personally, I think that World War I is both an interesting and horrifying setting, often in equal measure, and I think it's generally overlooked because World War II looms much larger. BAD takes World War I and it largely keeps to it. The tanks are still somewhat boxy, helped by the fact that LEGO is of course a boxy thing. I think the designs, many of which are community produced, are actually great. You can tell what they are just by looking at them. You could also imagine that these little boxy soldiers are wearing their Brody helmets and trying not to die of shell shock. Despite how dire the situation is in the world of BAD, I wouldn't necessarily call it entirely grimdark. A great tragedy has happened, yes, but people are rebuilding. The main crux of the conflict is the possession of some exotic material, which is necessary for the war machine, but it's not an existential fight for spiritual or physical survival. No offense to Trench Crusade, I think that it's a great game, but that level of grimdarkness is really not doing it for me anymore. I also think that the fact that the game uses LEGO as its primary vehicle for play is also something that keeps the tone less dark. All in all, I think that the lore is serviceable enough. Brodad Brickworks has expressed a desire to continue developing it, and I think it's probably enrichment for him, as I know it is for many other people who make wargames, myself included, and this is the type of game where if you really have an idea, you can get on board and you can help and contribute if you want. So, while the lore of the game is interesting, I don't think it's the reason that I'm recommending this game. At the start, I mentioned the game Mobile Frame Zero. Many of you are probably scratching your heads, although some of you are nodding in recognition. Mobile Frame Zero, I think, in some ways, is one of the OG LEGO wargames. To this day, I think that the production behind Mobile Frame Zero is phenomenal. I still like to read that rulebook to this day. I think it's a really well-made rulebook, and that's something that you don't really see in the indie wargame space. The problem for me, at least in my opinion, is that I don't actually enjoy playing Mobile Frame Zero. I think a lot of things held this game back from being truly great, but that I think is a topic for another video. So, if I'm recommending that you play BAD, it's because I think that the gameplay mechanics are some combination of fun, simple, and suitable for the lore. The first thing that you need to know about this game is that it is designed around LEGO. You don't have to use LEGO in terms of what you're playing with, but it is designed around LEGO. For example, measurements are scaled in standard LEGO brick sizes, that is, namely, for the 2x4 LEGO brick. The other thing is that you don't need any special dice. Those that know me in my personal life know that I have an absolute hatred for games, tabletop, board game, or war game, that require special custom-made dice. I really don't like it. I think it's a huge bugbear in trying to get people to actually play your game, and generally speaking, I think that the dice that are available to people are more than sufficient. In this case, to play bad, you need some d6s, some d8s, and some d10s. These are accessible dice, depending on how you slice it. I know that you can get a lot of these in basically any standard D&D playset, and you don't really need a lot of them, about 3 to 4 at least. The other thing to mention is, of course, that the creator recommends that if you don't have the dice, you can just use a dice rolling app. And there are plenty of those. You can even roll dice on Google these days. This game is also, of course, designed around LEGO players, which means that I think that even a player with a very modest collection of LEGO should be able to find the parts required to make things like the minis and the rulers and so on and so forth. Even if you can't do that, I think it would still be possible to play this game with things like paper or cardboard. You just have to follow the measurements for rulers and make sure that your base sizes are okay. I don't think at all that this game places a high material requirement on its players. A lot of games, or at least some games, do place a high material requirement. I'm looking at you, Games Workshop, in order to actually start playing. Some games don't, and I think that's really, really good. I think of this game as something that is more on the introductory, more on the casual side to hardcore, although certainly I could see people playing this more seriously, especially with some of the more advanced rules that are available. But I think that this game is accessible enough that I could teach somebody how to play it, even if that person had never played any war games before. I think it's just about how you present your rules and what you think is important. In terms of how this game actually functions, there are basically just two types of units: squads and individual soldiers. Squads are exactly what they say, they're just a collection of soldiers, usually 4, and oftentimes they can be armed from things like rifles to machine guns to mortars. Vehicles, on the other hand, basically come in two flavors: tanks or mechs, which are called Brassbound. Now, I think that this idea basically introduces kind of a rock, paper, scissors mechanic to the game. Some of the other players maybe don't necessarily agree with me, but I find that, generally speaking, you want to have a combination of infantry, tanks, and mecha. Your armies are designed around having one of each, although you could play with only infantry or only tanks or only mecha. I think that the game is more fun as a combined arms game than it is as a solo one, but again, mileage may vary. The scale of the game is very much around kind of a company level. Yeah, you're commanding squads of soldiers, but you're not really going to command a lot of them. And yeah, you have some vehicles, but you don't have a lot of them. You're always meant to be thinking about this game as happening as part of a larger conflict in the background, right? Maybe a handful of tanks and a couple of squads of soldiers are detached on a mission, or maybe we're focusing in on a specific break in the enemy army and the formations that are leading it. Regardless, I don't think you're meant to think of this game as some massive battalion or regimental level wargame. I think, in fact, if you played it at this kind of scale, the game would really, really slow down and struggle. I'm a big believer in allowing games to excel at what they're meant for. I don't think that anybody should actually play Warhammer 40k at a very large scale. I think the game actually is much worse at larger scales than it is at smaller scales. And scale, I mean in terms of points cost here. Although I do think that Warhammer is actually better at 10mm than it is at 28mm, or I guess 32mm now with the scale creep. So, yes, this game, you can sort of think about it a bit like games like Warhammer 40k or Bolt Action, if you're familiar. But unlike Warhammer 40k, this game uses alternating activations, and it takes place more or less over 6 rounds. During a round, players will activate their units one at a time. If, however, you decide to skip a unit activating, then you can't activate for the rest of that round. So generally speaking, you should always try to be doing something. I don't think that this is a game where passivity is encouraged. You really want to try and do something and not just wait for the enemy to come to you. Most of the time, generally, shooting will be your main form of attack, and the types of weapons that you can use depend on the range that you are from your target. So for example, a tank has 2 types of weapons: a coaxial machine gun and a main tank gun. The former can be used up to long distance range, which is about 10 inches, and the latter can be fired basically across the length of the table. To give you an indication of what the scale is like, on the battlefield, a tank can fire basically across the table. A machine gun, more or less can fire some distance, but not the entire length of the table. The other thing to note is, of course, that squads take damage directly. So when a squad takes damage, that represents a casualty of the member of the squad. You can wipe out a squad if you give them enough casualties to hit every single member. Vehicles, on the other hand, get armor saves that allow them to resist damage. Even though, of course, if they take sufficient damage, I think it's 2, they get blown up. So in a raw sense, a squad can take more hits than a tank, but a tank has much more survivability because it has the armor to survive taking damage. Also, I think worth noting is that a basic rifle squad is about 50 points, and a tank is about 100 points, which means that the way that you think about the cost efficiency is that one tank is worth about 2 squads of soldiers. The hit mechanics, that is how you actually shoot people, might be where some people get a little bit tripped up. In this game, vehicles are hit on a 5+, and squads are hit on 4 or less. So that means that larger dice, like d10s, are actually better saved for hitting at vehicles, whereas smaller dice, like d6, are better used against infantry. That, I think, is an interesting mechanic. It's not something that you see very often, and I think that players might have to get a little bit used to that system, because for the most part, we're used to one-way game systems where all things hit on more or less the same scale and in the same directionality. That is, everybody needs to try and roll high, or everybody needs to try and roll low. This game, of course, splits it. Infantry generally are hit on low rolls, vehicles are hit on high rolls. And there are, of course, critical hits that do additional things. So, for example, if you roll a 2 when hitting a squad, that can be a critical hit, and that can do additional damage. Or if you're rolling an 8 when hitting a vehicle, that can also do critical damage to the vehicle as well. If this video does well, then perhaps I will make a full guide on how to play when the rules come out of the beta. But I do want to focus on one part of the game that I do think is quite novel, specifically the advantage and disadvantage system. Basically, advantage means that you get reroll on your rolls, and disadvantage means that your opponent gets rerolls on your rolls. So to make that a bit clearer, if you have, for example, an action that has advantage 1, that means that you, the player, can reroll 1 die when doing an action that has that advantage. However, if you're doing an action that has disadvantage 1, then your opponent can force you to reroll 1 of your dice instead. And that I think is interesting because it means that some actions will be inherently easier to do, and some of them will be inherently more difficult. The advantage and disadvantage can also cancel out, and they can stack to some extent. So for example, you can have advantage 2 going up against advantage 1 being reduced now to advantage 1. However, regardless of what your advantage or disadvantage is, you can only ever reroll 1 dice. So I think it's worth it to stack some advantages, especially if you suspect that you're going to have to deal with a powerful disadvantage. But you don't have to because it's not necessarily game-changing. It's just 1 roll per action. Finally, there are some advanced rules for things like structures, spotters, short-range combat, and so on and so forth. But the basic idea of the game is that you're going to be moving and shooting. For the most part, in the game that I played, or the games rather, I spent most of the time just shooting at my opponent, trying to maneuver them into a better place to shoot at them. The close combat rules weren't really that available at that point, although again, in this game system, close combat is pretty much to the death, which is very similar to bolt action if you're familiar with that rule set. All in all, I think that bad takes a little bit of acclimation time. I think the idea of rolling high to hit vehicles and rolling low to hit infantry might throw people off at first, but I think it does make a kind of sense, right? After all, an attack that works well against vehicles wouldn't necessarily work well against infantry, so I think that splitting the difference on that dice range is an interesting idea. The most important part, however, is that I think that this game has potential. If you're a wargamer looking for a weird World War I game, I think this game has you covered. If you're a LEGO fan looking to do something with your collection, I think that this would be a fun use of your time. Certainly the community is very receptive to user-made designs, and I think you could have a lot of fun just coming up with your own tanks and mechs and things. The most important part, though, I think, is that the creator of this game, Brodad Brickworks, is very committed to actually bringing it to life. I think that in the time that I've been following this community and I've been following the game, Brodad has tried to put out consistent updates, he's always working on new things, he's very receptive to user feedback and community advice. I think that this is the kind of person who is committed to making their game a reality. Yes, I don't think it will be produced to the same high-level polish that we might expect of like a full box release, but this is a free game, right? A free game made by somebody who is passionate about gaming, and I think that that's worth recognizing and supporting. So yes, in closing, I think that Brassbound Adamantine Dawn is a nifty project that could pay some dividends down the line if we invest in it. All the creator is really asking for is your time, and I think that especially for this game, that would be worth it. So, thanks everybody for watching the video. Remember to like and subscribe. Share it if you think that there's a LEGO fan or wargamer in your life who could really benefit from learning about this game. The links will be in the description. The channel is still currently not eligible for monetization, thank you YouTube. So, with your help, I can hopefully reach the required goals before May when I can reapply for the partner program. I will try to work on videos when I can, but there's also some personal stuff that's going on in my life that might make that a little bit tricky. As I always say, the horrors persist, but so must we. Until next time, take care and goodbye.